Welcome to today's discussion, Agribites and Biodiversity. We are looking at biodiversity, which plays a crucial role in purifying water, stabilizing and moderating the climate, and regulating floods, droughts, and epidemics. In other words, biodiversity is crucial for our survival. There is a need to examine the existing policies and budgetary allocations in the agri-food space from 2000-2001 to financial year 2025. This will help us understand how reforming biodiversity detrimental support to those with positive or at least neutral outcomes for biodiversity, environment, and human health while achieving food, nutritional, and livelihood security. Today, we have with us Dr. Reena Singh, Senior Fellow ICRIER, who will share her insights on this very crucial topic. So, Dr. Singh, supporting agriculture through various subsidies and incentives was necessary during the early years of India's growth story. So, please shed light on whether these subsidies and incentives can actually have detrimental impacts on biodiversity.
Thank you, Shibani, for initiating this very important dialogue on biodiversity, agrobiodiversity, and the impact of these subsidies, incentives on agrobiodiversity. Let's take a minute or two to first understand what biodiversity, agrobiodiversity, and these incentives are all about. See, bio is a Greek word. Literally, it means bios, it means life. So, and the diversity is the variability and the variety. So, literally speaking, biodiversity is the diversity of the living organisms. But when we go into the technical definition, it also includes the ecological complexes. So basically, if we talk about agrobiodiversity, it is a subset of the biological diversity which deals with the biodiversity of the food and the agriculture systems. So it includes the diversity of the plants, diversity of the animals, the diversity of the microbiota. It even includes the pollinators, the biocontrol agents, the pest control agents, and all the agroecosystems which are involved in it. So if we look at it, so there are three different levels of this diversity that exists. One is at the ecosystem level, and within that ecosystem, there is the diversity at the species level. There will be different kind of crop plants. There is a genetic diversity where, like within the wheat species or within the rice species, there could be, thousands of the land races and the varieties. And the diversity at all three levels, they're really very important. And the services this agrobiodiversity is providing, so it has all these provisioning services, the regulatory services, the aesthetic services. It provides the food security and the livelihood opportunities. Now, our agri policies, they were basically devised in an era where there was a food scarcity. So they were mostly oriented towards the productivity, and their impact on the biodiversity or agrobiodiversity, it was basically unknown, they were unforeseen, they were ignored, and they were undervalued basically. So this, our study, it's basically a joint study of ICRIER, BioFin, and UNDP, where we have tried to look at this particular aspect, how these incentives, whether they are having an impact on the biodiversity or not.
So more than half of the cultivated area under major crops is covered by improved varieties and farming practices with high inputs on fertilizer, pesticides, water, electricity, and mechanization. Agriculture incentives and subsidies has encouraged this trend. So this heavy reliance on the few species, varieties, and breeds, and the vanishing pollinators and other beneficial organisms that support food and agriculture can pose various threats to food security, economic stability, also disrupting the resilience of the agriculture system. So according to you, what are the legal, policy, and institutional frameworks that India needs to put in place for achieving the global biodiversity targets, national targets, and the sustainable development goals?
See, India, it just comprises, around 2.3 or 2.4% of the entire world's land area, and then still it harbors 7 to 8% of the biodiversity. So it's basically a rich it's rich in biodiversity, and it is one of the 12 mega diverse centers, and it is also one of the 8 center of the Vavilos Center of crop origin, and around 166 crop species have been originated in India. So having said that, India is definitely places a lot of emphasis on the conservation of its diversity, and it includes the agrobiodiversity. And Convention of Biological Diversity was adopted in 1992, and There, India is also a signatory among other 195 nations, and India is definitely committed to all those frameworks. And in 2008, India has adopted this National Strategy of Biodiversity Action Plan. So they have developed it, and which was amended in 2014, and which at that point of time India has committed for the 12 national biodiversity targets, which were in alignment with the HE biodiversity targets. But in 2022, there was at Montreal, there was a Montreal Global Diversity Framework. It was adopted because at that point of time, all the parties of the CBD, all 195 parties, they felt that the progress of the biodiversity targets, they're not up to the mark. So they have adopted a new framework, and then it has 23 targets that needs to be achieved by 2030, and it has 4 focus areas, thrust areas that needs to be achieved by 2050. And since India has also committed to that particular framework, so India is definitely obliged to meet all those targets. And aligning with that KMGBF framework, India has also amended and come up with the National Biodiversity Action Plan. It's called as NBSAP, it's National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan.
Okay, so there's a need to identify the cause and effect link between the subsidies and incentives and the state of agrobiodiversity, because few subsidies could be beneficial, yet others could also have detrimental impacts. So what are the subsidies and incentives that are harmful to agrobiodiversity, if you can shed light on that? And also, is there any way to measure their magnitude and what harm can they actually potentially cause to the environment?
Yeah, see, as I've mentioned just now, that India is committed to the this Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Framework and the National Biodiversity Framework, and they explicitly talk about Target 18, which is basically to repurpose the detrimental incentives to biodiversity. So we have this obligation as a country to first identify it, and then you just repurpose whichever is harmful to the biodiversity. So there is a 3-pronged approach to move forward in that direction. Before we just go for this negative incentive, we need to have, what's the level of incentives and structure that is being going towards this agri-food sphere. So what we have done in this particular study, in the first step, what we have looked at is we have taken the entire 25 years analysis, that we have taken the documents, consulted the budget documents, the state budget documents, and also the CAG reports. And some of those incentives and subsidies we have calculated ourselves based on few assumptions that we have already documented in our report. So what we found, like over a period of 25 years, now the agri-food budget support is coming from 8 different ministries. Mm-hmm. And then we have evaluated around 46 schemes with 87 components, sub-components I will say. And the budget, and if we just look at the triennial ending T 2024. So the amount is basically 7,076 billion rupees per annum. So that's the level of agri-food budget that is going from the central government. And apart from that, the state governments, they're also spending this budget to this particular sector. Now this budget, it's actually it comprises somewhere around 17.3% of the budget expenditure, and it's around 2.7% of the country's GDP. So the budget is like this. So that's the first step. And then the second step is like we have evaluated all these the subsidies, incentives, and all those support against whether they are having any adverse impact on the targets that we have already committed. Mm-hmm. So we have 23 targets, and not all the targets we have evaluated, but out of that 23 targets, we have picked up those targets which are directly influencing or which are relevant to the agri-food sector. For example, this target 7, it's basically to reduce pollution. So, by fertilizer, if we are adding, it is causing some pollution like nitrate leaching if we are doing the excessive application of fertilizer. And then it is also, some of the fertilizer is also leached down, and some of if it is volatilized, and some of it is denitrified, and some of it is actually converting it into the nitrous oxide emissions, which has a major impact on the climate change, and it's contributing to the global warming. And because of that, we are able to see a lot of adversaries and extreme events, and so that is target 7. Then target 8 is basically to minimize the impact of the climate change. And then we have, like, for example, target 10, where we are talking about the sustainable management of the agriculture. Then the 11 target, it talks about to have that conservation of the ecosystem services. And then we have target 16, which talks about the sustainable consumption of the food. And then we have target 18, which I've already said, like we have to repurpose the the biodiversity detrimental incentives. So we have evaluated the subsidies, incentives, and the schemes on these targets. And on that basis, we have categorized this support and these incentives and subsidies into 4 categories. The first is those incentives which are positive to the biodiversity. And we have found, like, here we have done the time series analysis of 25 years, but right now the number which I'm giving is for T to 2024. Right. If somebody wants to have that comparison, they can just go back and they can just read the full report. But just to put the numbers into some perspective, I am just picking one example of 1 T. Okay, so in 2024, like, the biodiversity positive incentives, they were somewhere around 22%, and then they include, like, the expenditures which is moving for the developmental activities of the agriculture sector as a whole. For example, like agriculture R&D. And then there are many schemes like, Krishi, Paramparagat Krishi Yojana, then natural farming, those Namami Gange project, where the government is basically promoting the sustainable agricultural activities, organic agriculture, and those development kind of a thing. So these are all positive, we found. And then the second category is the biodiversity negative incentives. Where those schemes and those subsidies and incentives, they are impacting the biodiversity in a negative manner. It's basically, I'm talking of the agrobiodiversity. So the fertilizer subsidy, we found, like, it has an adverse impact on those targets which I've mentioned. It is impacting NBT 4 target, like 7 target, which is the control of pollution, then the climate change, even the sustainable consumption, all those different targets. It has negative impacts. And then the third category is where the incentives, they are neutral to the biodiversity. Right. Now we have those few of the support which is moving directly to the farmers, and it is helping them to improve their income. Like, for example, we have this PM Kisan, where the farmer, they get 6,000 rupees per year in 3 different installments. So if it is given or it is not given, it has neutral impact on biodiversity. Similarly, we have loan waivers, we have the credit subsidies, we have crop insurance. So they are basically, they're not dependent on any particular product or any particular crop. So it is found to be neutral. And then we have the mixed impact, for example, the food subsidy. And before coming to the food, this neutral impact, it has 13% of the share. And fourth is the mixed impact, like in food subsidy. It is, kind of encouraging the monocropping, because for the food subsidy, the government provide, for the distribution, they have to procure the food grains, and they fix the MSP. So although they fix the MSP for 23 crops, but generally, the procurement is mostly for the wheat and rice, and that encourages the monocropping of the wheat and rice. So it has the negative impact with respect to the monocropping pattern which is being encouraged, but it is also helping the country to achieve the food security target. So we have categorized it as a mixed target.
Thanks for such a comprehensive explanation. So it's pretty clear that the application of fertilizers, it leads to water pollution and eutrophication, affecting the aquatic ecosystem and the aquatic biodiversity, both of them. And this also increases the air pollution, the acidification, and the mineral depletion of the soil. So how can India plan to reduce the biodiversity harmful subsidies and incentives?
Yeah, so if we just talk about only just two subsidies, like the food subsidies and the fertilizer subsidy. Why I'm saying this two subsidies? Because both of them, when we together they comprise 63% of the entire agri-food sphere. And as I mentioned earlier, that fertilizer subsidy is having this detrimental impact. And why it is having that detrimental impact. So we have to just look at it a little deeper. Like in the latest year, this 2024-25, the budget for the fertilizer subsidy is somewhere around 164,000 crores. And out of this, it's the 119,000 crores is urea. So that means 70 to 73% of the fertilizer subsidy is going towards the urea.
Right.
And so the farmer, they're just paying 10% of the product cost and 90% of the cost, 10% or 20 or 15%. And rest of the cost the government is bearing. Whereas for other fertilizers like PK, so it's not that case. So they are decontrolled, and the government, they provide the subsidy per annum at a particular fixed rate. And it is based on the nutrient content. So that creates a massive imbalance in the price distortion, basically. So if the farmers, they are getting the cheap urea, so what are they doing? They are over applying, and there is a imbalanced, the distorted ratio, we all know about it. And now the ratio is somewhere around 10.9 is to 4.4 is to 1, the NPK ratio I'm talking about. So what is the way forward? What needs to be done? Like, one thing is, like, currently the structure is, the urea is very much controlled, and the fertilizer subsidy, the 73% of the share, 70 to 73% of the share, I'm talking about this per current year, but that's the trend overall. So that percentage, it's skewed towards only one product.
Right.
And that product is, it's not that environmental friendly, because if urea is applied to the plant, then the nitrogen use efficiency is not also 100%. So it's in upland, it's 50%, and in lowland system, it's only 35%. So that means more than half of it is lost. Through different processes which I explained, volatilization and nitrous oxide and leaching and all those things. So that means 50%, more than 50%, we are losing. So that is one thing. So why can't we subsidize other products? There could be liquid fertilizer, there could be biofertilizers, there are complex fertilizers where the nitrogen use efficiency is high. So instead of just subsidizing urea that heavily, we can be the product neutral. Subsidies should be there. So that means that is one point that we would like to say, that it has to be decontrolled. And it's not the thing that is coming up from this study. Many committees in the Niti Aayog, they have also conducted this study. So they're talking about it should be decontrolled, and it should move to the direct beneficiary transfer directly to the farmers, so that farmers then they are able to use what product they would like to buy. It's not only urea, so they can buy more fertilizer. So that is one point. It will definitely, if we are able to achieve the balanced fertilization, then definitely the soil degradation, the land degradation issues, they will also be little bit more, improved.
Be taken care of.
Yeah, it will be improved. And then the biodiversity, because biodiversity, soil microbiota, it is basically dependent on all these things, how the soil structure is, and if the fertilizer consumption is getting little lesser, then definitely the microbiota will also improve. So that is one thing. But why, if the government is aware about it, why it is not happening? So there are two challenges of this particular aspect. First is the fertilizers, it's not just the land owners who are using it. So in India, we have the tenant farmers, we have the sharecroppers. So they also use fertilizer. But if the government has to allocate the fertilizer subsidy on per hectare basis to the beneficiaries, how are they going to do it? Because currently all the schemes and all those subsidies and incentives, they're moving to those beneficiaries which are the landowners. But fertilizer is something which, if we are doing it in this manner, then it's going to be, we will not be able to help them out, the tenants and the sharecroppers. That is one aspect. And another thing is, if we are decontrolling urea and we are just giving it on per hectare basis, that means the price of the urea will go up. And if that price will go up, then what will happen? Then the cost of cultivation will also grow up for them. And now it is linked to the food subsidy. Because for the food subsidy, when the government is procuring those commodities, they are fixing the MSP. And it is based on the cost of cultivation. So that's the basic calculation from where this costing is derived at. So if the cost of cultivation goes up, then the food subsidy bill will definitely, it will grow up for sure. So there's fertilizer subsidy, if we are tackling on this basis, then we also have to tackle the food subsidy simultaneously. And if the food subsidy bill is going up, then the way out could be like earlier we used to have this targeted public distribution system where we have the targeted beneficiaries. There could be, we can reduce the beneficiaries by giving the food subsidy to only those people who really need it. It's not like all 800 million population need it, people need it, no. So those who are below poverty line, that is one thing that the government can do. And then secondly, it's not just the distribution of the food and there's food grains, it's also the legumes and the millets, which the government is also pushing. So it's basically include more items into the kitty, and instead of just giving 2-3 items, just have food coupons.
Right. So there, what has been the reason for Punjab's highest greenhouse emissions from rice cultivation on per hectare basis, and what measures can be taken to prevent that?
Yeah. Rice is a very important crop for our country, and we are the second highest producer of rice, and we have the highest production area, 49 million hectares. Now what happens when the farmers, they cultivate rice? So when they're transplanting rice, they're doing the extensive puddling of the soil, which is basically the wet tillage. And then they are keeping the fields flooded for 30-40 days. So in this process, it's okay, it's good for the rice field establishment, but in this process, it emits greenhouses at 4 different levels. One is the methane from the continuous flooding, and then the nitrous oxide when we are applying the nitrogen fertilizer. So it is also emitting the nitrous oxide. And then the residue burning, sometimes what happens, some states, I'm not saying like throughout it's happening, but in few states like Punjab and Haryana, but Punjab is the topmost state where such instances are happening. So from the burning of the residues, some of the greenhouse gases will also emit. So there's a third source. And the fourth source is when the farmers, they're using, the producers, they are using this electricity to have, those agriculture operations, particularly for the groundwater extraction. So it also emits carbon dioxide. So these 4 levels, these are 4 different sources from where the greenhouse gas emission is happening from the rice cultivation. Now in Punjab, all the 4 levels, if you look at it, it's high at all the 4 levels. Like, because there the power subsidy, the farmer is getting complete free power. So they are not very much conscious about the fact how much electricity they have to use. So the CO2 emissions, which is coming from the electricity use, is very high. And then because they are continuously flooding, because electricity is free, continuous flooding is happening. That's the reason the methane emissions is also there. And their per hectare nitrogen consumption, the fertilizer consumption is also very high. It's more than 250 kg per hectare. So fertilizer consumption also is very high. So from there, nitrous oxide is also there. And because of the limited time window between the wheat and rice, they are kind of burning their residues. Also, although the incidences have lowered down in recent years, but still, if you compare it with other states, they are the highest.
All right.
That's the reason, they are the highest GHG emitter per hectare.
There have been a lot of crop diversification initiatives by both the centre as well as the Punjab government to shift and lure the farmers away from rice cultivation and paddy. So what are the challenges associated with crop diversification per se in Punjab?
Yeah, in Punjab, see, there are two things here. The rice incentives and the profitability of the rice. These are the two aspects which are driving the farmers to grow paddy in that particular area. Since rice is, there is an assured procurement of rice from Punjab. And in many years, it's the 100% of the production it goes for the procurement. So if the farmer is getting the assured market, so they tend to grow rice. That is one thing. Second thing is, since rice is, it's basically, it's drawing a lot of fertilizers, water and other things. And there, the center is giving the fertilizer subsidy, the state is giving the power subsidy. So everything is so subsidized. So the incentives which is moving towards the rice are also high as compared to the other crops. So that's the reason the rice becomes very profitable there, and farmers, they don't want to shift from there.
Right. Since your report has also studied MP and Telangana, can you indicate what is the state of crop diversity in MP and Telangana?
Yeah. In MP, initially, there was a mixed cropping pattern, but when the government of MP, they have introduced this MSP bonus scheme on the procurement of wheat. Like they are providing 100 rupees per quintal over what central government is providing. So that has encouraged the farmers to shift towards the wheat. So although they are also growing, other crops also. I'm not saying they are no, they are growing other crops, but the percentage of wheat has also increased. Like initially when in 2000 it was 18% share, now it has moved to the 33%. So the only caution MP can take is they should not be having, this crop centric incentives. It should be a crop neutral thing so that the biodiversity and the agrobiodiversity remains maintained. In Telangana also it's the same thing, like the assured procurement of rice.
Right, so the increase in rice procurement in Telangana will discourage farmers, as you say, from crop diversification and have environmental impacts in the form of excessive fertilizer application, higher GHG emissions from rice cultivation and nitrate leaching in the groundwater. This will also impact the targets 4, 8, 16 of the NB SAPs. So in view of the needs of biodiversity, what should be the way forward for India in terms of policy options?
Yeah. In this, first, India should move towards the crop neutral incentives and even the product neutral incentives. It should not be focused. That is one thing that we would like to say. To promote the crop diversification, what we can propose is like center and state to offer a joint package where if the farmers are moving away from the paddy to other crops, so that much incentives, which is the incentive gap, that should be provided to the farmers. Only then they will be able to shift. For example, in Punjab, the incentive gap is somewhere around 35,000 per hectare because the paddy farmers, they are getting somewhere around 39,000 per hectare of incentives because of from the fertilizer subsidy and from the power subsidy and the canal irrigation subsidy. So if that because other crops, they are not using that fertilizer and that power and that irrigation. So that incentive, if we are giving it to the farmers, then they can shift to other crops. So that is one thing. And since the fertilizer is being saved, so the central government is going to save the fertilizer subsidy, and the power will be saved. The state will be able to save the power subsidy. So it's not we are not asking for this additional fund. It's basically the same money. It's getting repurposed in a better manner. So that is one thing that I would like to say. And then it should happen for a minimum of 5 years, because if the farmer is shifting away, and the government is providing incentive for only 1 year, then the farmer will get discouraged. Because in government of Haryana, they have introduced this scheme, but they have just introduced it 17,500 per hectare, and they are giving it only for 1 year. So there, maybe the center, they should add up the similar amount so that the farmer is able to get 35,000 per hectare. And they're just giving for 1 year, so farmers, they just go back to the paddy. Because every year the state and the central government are saving, so every year they should be getting at least for 5 years so that they have the market, built for the new crops that they're introducing and when they're moving away from paddy. And then the assured procurement of rice from these areas, if they're getting diversified, in that situation, some of the procurement, the MSP for rice is getting free. So that revolving MSP fund, it should be used for the procurement of these legumes and oilseeds. And another thing we can say is just to build the carbon market. So because if the farmers, they're diversifying from the paddy, then the emission level will be reduced. For example, in Punjab, per hectare basis, it's 5 ton per hectare. And with other crops, it's less than, 1 ton. So if they're saving 4 tons, so if they are able to get the value of it, then it is possible for the farmers to shift.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for sharing your valuable insights. It's clear that instead of further incentivizing biodiversity detrimental practices, India should assess options to repurpose the subsidy policies to neutralize their effects on biodiversity, which is critical to resource mobilization needed to implement the KMGBF and the NBSAP. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on AgriBites and Biodiversity. Stay tuned for more conversations that matter.